In this video, we're going to cover how to create tool paths. So to get started, I'm going to create a few shapes. I'll talk a little bit about the shapes as I am creating them, but let's say I wanted to cut out a couple of stars. You just click and drag, then you can pick and rotate where you want your star to be. Now, once you have your size of star made, you can come in here and alter and change how many points you want your star to have. We're just going to do the typical 5-point. You can change the radius of these points or anything like that. Each one of these little tabs along this circle, or not circle, the star, will change some of the features of the star. Once you've found what you want, you're going to click somewhere off on the grid to finalize it. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when we're talking tool paths, we're talking male or female tool paths. Now, what that means is if I want to keep this star as perfect of a star and follow those lines perfectly out on the machine, then I'm going to cut this with a male tool path. Our torch has a lead in. It starts outside of your object and then burns into your line and then cuts. If it was a female cut, then that tool path would start on the inside of your object, burn to your line, and then cut. So you would have a lead-in cut into your shape that you're trying to keep. And I'll show you the difference between both once I get them. Now, this star I want to create the tool path for, I am going to click to highlight it, or I can click and drag to highlight it. I'll come up here to Machine, scroll down to Tool Path, Create Tool Paths, and Male. On this, it'll pop up your template. For some reason, this is called Christmas Cutout. Don't know why. I am going to go Basic Cut. I'm going to make sure my tool is plasma because we have a engraver and etcher on our machine, but we want to make sure that it's listed as plasma. And we don't have to mess with these directions, climbing or conventional toolpath coordinate, none of this stuff. It should already be set on your CAD. The only thing we need to always make sure we do is change this feed rate from 0 to 100. There is a way you can go in and set this thing up to run on whatever consumables we are currently have in on the machine. But because you guys at home are not going to have my manual to my Flex Cut 80 and know the parameters to set everything up, you're going to set it as 100. That will make sure when we upload the job into the actual machine here, it actually knows and has a starting point to run from, and we'll change it percentage-wise on our VMD screen. Now, you can come in to your lead in and lead out and change that from an arc or a line. So a line is just going to be straight in and then cut the shape, or you can have an arc and that'll have a slight curve before it starts cutting. The arc is better when you're trying to cut out bolt holes, things like that. Because it's leading in a circle or circular motion, it makes cleaner cuts versus just a line. The radius, that's basically the sharpness of that curve. So once we have those things selected, we're just, like I said, you should only have to come to Basic Cut and put feed rate 100. We're going to hit OK. Now what you can see is the lines have darkened. Those are our tool path lines. And you need to be careful because you can, when you go to move this to the bottom left or anywhere, some things that can happen is if you only select the toolpath, then you're separating it from the actual job lines. And if you have to come back in and edit anything, that can really complicate stuff. So always move the lines and the toolpaths together. Now to bring these back, I'm just going to hit Control Z to undo. That's Control Z to undo. Now you can see the lead in starts on the outside of this star and then works its way into the edge. Now you can imagine this black line, the reason it's thicker is that's showing you basically the kerf of the plasma cut. And kerf is the width of the plasma arc. That's the width of material that is being ate away or consumed through the cut. That is called the kerf. Just in case you do create a toolpath and you can't see this darker line and it's just showing your regular job lines, what you may need to do is come up and click View and scroll down and make sure that the toolpaths, Show Toolpaths is selected. If it's not, you can't tell that there's a job or a toolpath on this job, and I've had some students go in and make 3-4 different toolpaths for the same line because they couldn't see it, and then when we go to cut it, it's trying to cut all of those lines, even though after the first cut, this star would drop through. So make sure that your Show Toolpaths is selected so that you can see your toolpaths. Now, if I were to have this, let's say, inside of an object, so I can show you what a female toolpath looks like, I am going to go to Shape Tools and create a circle. And that way I can I'll have this star on the inside of that. And you can do this one of two ways, but you need to make sure you're sequencing your cuts. What that means is you're putting them in the right order to cut. And I'll show you how to check that. But basically we want to start on the inside and then work our way to the outside. That way the order is correct. We're going to select the star, just like we did before, but we're going to go through Machine, Create Toolpath, and hit Female, and Basic Cut, put in 100, and hit OK. Now, when we zoom in, you can see that the lead-in is on the inside of the star because I want a perfect star cut out of this circle. Let's say we're making a Christmas ornament. Now I'm going to select the outside line, the circle, and go through, hit Machine, Create Toolpath, Male, Basic Cut. And because I've already made a male cut on this job, it's saved that I put 100 in. I'm going to hit OK, and you can see there's a lead in and you can see the toolpaths. Now, there is another way that can simplify things to make sure you get your sequencing correctly, is we can go through and connect it before we create our toolpaths. So before I get into that, I'm going to show you how to check the sequencing. I'm going to highlight whatever I've got toolpaths made for. I'm going to come up to Layout, Sequence, and we're going to go Sequence by List. That is going to pull up some of our tool lines. I like to just select toolpaths only so I know what I'm looking at, because sometimes it'll show polygraph and a whole bunch of weird stuff I don't understand. But if you select toolpaths only, it's going to show you what is to be cut first versus last. And because we want this cut out of a circle, we want to make sure this is the very last tool path that's going to run on the job. If this was the first to be cut, this circle is going to drop through on the machine. And when it goes to cut the star, then there's not going to be material there for it to cut, and you'll crash the machine, or it just isn't going to cut. So we want to make sure that that circle is after the star. Once you double check that, you're going to hit OK. And then sequencing is done correctly. Or, like I mentioned, with connecting, I'm going to delete these toolpaths. Connecting the toolpath will automatically sequence them when you go to make your toolpath. Now, when I talked about the show fill in the last video, when you hit show fill and you don't have these items connected, it's just going to blacken in the outermost object line. It's not going to show the star unless you do connect those images or those lines. So to do that, I'm going to highlight both, come up to arrange, connect path. Remember, you need 4 zeros, then a 1, then a 0. Hit OK. Now when I hit show fill, it is actually showing and determining what's going to be left still and what's going to be dropping through. Now when I go and make my toolpath, all I have to do is make one toolpath, and it's going to create everything for you automatically sequence-wise. For whatever reason, if you make a toolpath on female, it's going to flip it, and it'll put the toolpaths on the inside of this outside line versus on the outside for a male line. We want this circle to be nice and perfect. So when we come up, hit machine, create toolpath, we're going to hit male toolpath. Basic cut, it's already been done because we've made toolpaths before on this job. Hit OK. And you can see that it's put a toolpath on the outside edge, and it's already flipped it for the inside object. It's taking care of whether or not, oh, the star needs to be a female and the circle needs to be a male. It does that for you. Some jobs you're not going to be able to connect it before you make your toolpaths, and you will need to know how to sequence it correctly. But for a lot of jobs, you can connect it, then create your toolpaths, and it's going to make this a lot easier to remember as far as, or double check that the sequencing is done correctly so we don't crash on the machine. But when we go to check sequencing after we've connected something, and we go select by list, it's only going to show one image. But trust me when I tell you, when we go to cut this, the machine is going to cut the star first, then the outside circle. And that's how you make toolpaths.